So in this module we're going to be looking at some other types of correction techniques. We're going to begin to look at what we can do with hue and saturation adjustments, and then we're also going to look at how we might be able to use blending modes to make some corrections. And you've already done this in the text, but the text doesn't do a fantastic job of giving you guys context. Let's first look at hue and saturation. Hue and saturation is a really great tool, and it can be used for a number of things. We can enhance color with it, we can change colors with it, but we can also use it as a correction technique when we want to remove color of a particular type from an image. Take for instance these teeth that you see here. Everybody has teeth that are a little bit more yellow than they desire, and so for the retouching project we can use the hue saturation to actually help alleviate some of the yellow and other colors that we see in people's teeth. First, before I get into the hue saturation, I'm going to go ahead and introduce another selection technique to you folks that we haven't looked at yet. We have a selection technique that I really like, and maybe the reason why I like it is because it's been around for several versions of Photoshop, so I've been using it a long time. It's called the quick mask. The quick mask is accessed with the button over here at the bottom of the tools panel. We can also press Q on the keyboard to access the quick mask. The quick mask, go ahead and click on it, is essentially a way by which we can paint a selection. I have a brush here, and I'm just simply going to, I'm increasing the size of the brush with the bracket keys, like we learned about in previous modules, and I'm going to paint over the areas that I want to affect. So I'll just go through and paint the teeth in, and you'll find that really for the teeth, the selection doesn't have to be really fantastic. It's pretty forgiving because we are actually going to be focusing in on particular areas of color. Yellow is one in particular we're going to be looking at, and I'm just increasing and decreasing the size of the brush as I need to, as I paint around. Now, one of the interesting things about the quick mask is that we have this rubylith overlay. That's this red that we're painting with, and we can change that. I'm pretty comfortable with it, so I stick with it. So you can change it to another color. But it's actually not selecting the area that I'm painting. The rubylith overlay actually indicates what is protected, not selected. So I'm actually going to have to invert this after I have this selected. And we'll show you that in just one moment here. So there we go. I have painted the teeth in, and I've done a pretty fair job. It's not perfect, but that's okay. I'm going to hit Q on the keyboard to exit my quick mask, and now you can see the marching ants that indicate the selection. But you can actually see it's the area outside of the teeth that is selected. So I'm going to invert the selection. I can invert the selection going through the selection menu and then clicking inverse, or I can press Control-Shift-I on the keyboard, which is what I did just there, and that really quickly inverts the selection. So now it's just the teeth. It's okay that I have some other areas that are not, perfectly selected, because like I said, we're going to be focusing on particularly the yellows. If we wanted to, we could select a selection tool, click on the refine edge, and play with the selection. As you can see with the refine edge selected, it's pretty good actually. We did a pretty decent job anyway. So you can see that's mostly the teeth there. Now I'm going to show you how to use the hue saturation. Now a lot of folks might think, well, I'll just desaturate the teeth because of course I don't want color in my teeth. I want my teeth to be white. That's not going to have the effect that you might expect that it does. In fact, if you look and see here, we'll click desaturate, and now the teeth are gray, which that's not at all what we wanted to do. It looks pretty terrible, in fact. But if we go into the hue saturation, let's go ahead and undo that there, we will have the ability to finely tune which colors we want to desaturate and lighten. So click on the hue saturation, and I think we've seen this before in the book, but if not, I'll just kind of give you a tour. The hue is the actual color. We can change the actual color of the teeth. Go back to the default there. The saturation, how intense the colors are, or excuse me, how much of the color there is or is not. So we can desaturate or we can oversaturate. And then how light it is. But that's not all we can do. Right now we have it's set to the master, which is all colors. But if we click on that, you can see we also can manipulate individually the reds, yellows, cyans, blues, and magentas. So we can actually fine-tune these. I'm going to go into the yellows, and what we're going to do is with the yellow is we're just going to we're going to knock the saturation back in the yellows a little bit. It doesn't have to be a ton. And then we're going to brighten the yellows. And take a look. Let's double click, or excuse me, click the preview button so you can go back and forth. You see what happens there? It removes a lot of the yellow, but it's very subtle. And of course, it's not making the teeth quite as unbelievably white. And we don't want it to be unbelievably white. We want it to be believable. So I've removed some of the yellow just by going to the yellow channel, decreasing the saturation, increasing the lightness. Now these are just arbitrary numbers here. I just do it to the eye. There's no set of numbers that I use in particular. I can now go back to the master, and if I want to take it a step further, I can desaturate just a touch. I don't want to go too far because it gets gray, but I can do just a touch, and then I can even brighten them just a touch. But again, you don't want to get too crazy because, of course, you get too crazy, then it starts to look like. And of course, that's way too far. But I mean, even in this area, or to remove the white this much, it's just too much. So be fairly moderate in how you adjust the master. And you can see there, that's pretty nice. That's going to make just about any customer pretty darn happy. Now, like it says in the lecture, this is not one of those things that you want to ask people. You don't say, hey, I noticed your teeth are nice and yeller. You want me to do something like that for you? This could lead to a misunderstanding. Some people might be offended by that. Typically what photographers do is they just do this kind of thing, and then they don't tell people, they just let people be happy with the results. If it comes up in conversation, that's fine, but be very tactful about it. Same thing goes for things like removing blemishes, or later in the class you'll learn how to use liquify, and you can actually shave off a couple of pounds for folks. So there is the hue saturation technique. I'll just go ahead and click OK, and then deselect so you can see the result. To whiten teeth. Now, as it says in the module, you can also use the same technique for the whites of the eyes. This is not at all limited to one type of color. You can use this for a number of different applications. You're only really limited by your creativity.